Oh my goodness, it's 10 minutes early and I've got two people already. Can you hear me okay? Is my audio working? Great.
I can hear you.
I'm not hearing. You're not muted, Nick, but I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, now I can. Okay. I wonder if I have my audio.
I had just unmuted it just a second before I started talking, so maybe it took a second.
Okay. Okay, well, we got some time to kill. I hope that what I threw together is actually interesting for people, but we can always do additional topics too. So this is the I've been using Zoom for years for other stuff, but always just as a participant. This is, I think, the first one that I just bought a subscription last week. I think this is the first one I've ever actually hosted.
Put it to
As
good
long as
use.
we don't get any dick pics.
Oh, thanks. For the record, this is being recorded.
I'll probably be in and out. I've got a webcast that starts at 10 as well, but
Oh, no worries.
whichever one is most interesting.
Are people actually able to do any flying?
I've been flying. I went flying yesterday, but it's pretty easy in a 152 to go by yourself.
Yeah. You're in Montana, as I recall, right?
I actually moved to Spokane. I work for Horizon now, so. But yeah, I was met you at Oshkosh in 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was taking a look at Governor Inslee's order and trying to figure out where privately going up and practicing some approaches and stuff fell on the essential services. You know, on the one hand, it's like, okay, you're not.
Probably doesn't.
You're socially distanced. It looks like no, they don't want, you know, the flight schools are closed. You know, it's but you know, and you still got to, at least for the club plane, you got to wipe everything down, and you're consuming. You know, you don't want to be the cause of a search and rescue or anything like that. Hello.
Hi.
I got a co-pilot, so I'll probably be muted most
Hey,
of the
Mark.
time.
Good to actually see your face.
Face to face, sort of.
Sort of. So I see there's Trevor's got a young pilot in making. My son actually soloed in mid-March, and then everything stopped.
Well, hopefully he has some way to keep up proficiency, maybe a simulator at home or something.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll be able to get back in the air soon, especially with the good Northwest flying weather that's coming. He's about to get on a Zoom call in about 5 minutes for school, so I hope that the two of us on Zoom doesn't kill all of the bandwidth to the house. I think I can do this all. Can everyone see my my web browser?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I can do all of it, but the last part where I'm talking about mobile apps in the browser. So, although that now I can't see the chat window, so we probably don't need to be all unmuted. It's not like there's going to be hundreds of people on, so we can probably, that might just be the easier way to have interactive Q&A. Let's see, what am I looking for?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Oh, no, I got the chat window now. Okay, so I can see everything I need to see. And Dan, I get to see what you look like. I assume that's a virtual background and you're not actually midair right now.
No, we met at Oshkosh last year.
Oh, yes, we did. Yes, we did.
In Hangar.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a virtual background. Not my airplane, though. I need one of my airplane. That's a bus.
Yeah, I decided against doing the virtual background, but it's just,
Okay.
I have a, wait. How do I change that in the gallery view?
So you can see us, but we can't see you right now.
At the moment, oh, right. That was part
Okay.
of it. Was
That's cool.
focus should be on the demos.
Yeah, tips and tricks.
Yeah, we'll just give it about another 2 minutes and we can start.
Hey, does my microphone work?
It does. Is
It
that Michael
does.
that spoke?
I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael. Good to meet you.
Are you going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves, Eric?
I can. Depends
you
on
know
how
who
many
you-
people we have.
Oh, true. If your users, do you have an idea if your users are more GA people, military, airline, corporate?
You know, I don't ever collect that information in any kind of explicit manner. I know I have a good segment of each, and I can sort of triangulate on it a little bit by, you know, who's flying Apache helicopters and who's flying
Yeah.
Boeings and who's flying 172s. I would guess that it's about 50% GA and the rest some mix of military and commercial. I'd probably also guess that we're about 60% US. There's actually a decent amount of non-US usage. I suppose I could also look at Google to see where people are accessing from to get some more information on that.
Google Analytics.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got 9:59, so why don't we get going here? I see a few people joining. Hello, welcome. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that you can all make it, actually, because that means that you're not flying, and that's a shame. So let me just sort of start off by saying I hope everyone's staying safe, and we will get through this. It will be a little while, but there will be a light at the end of the tunnel, even if we can't see it yet. At least that's what I keep telling myself. So let's hope that that's the case. It looks like we're maybe 20-ish people here. I can actually get a proper count on. Yeah, about 20 people. So yeah, mute if you don't have anything to say. It just helps with the audio overall. But I think that's a small enough group that we don't need to use the chat. If you have a question or want me to go in more deeply on something, just unmute yourself. I think that'll be fine. And with that, so what I thought I'd do today is have a little bit of fun, getting geeky, getting into the details, getting into the weeds, finding and highlighting some of the esoterica and hidden functionality in my flight book. Also to show a little bit of the breadth of what's there. A lot of people just sort of use one piece or use another piece. And if, hopefully to uncover other areas that would be worth doing a deep dive on. I can do a deep dive on doing import and export. I can do a deep dive on Part 117 duty periods and rest computations. I've actually had some of those conversations with some of you. Heck, if people are interested, I could do a deep dive behind the curtain on the administrative tools. Actually, I think it'd be great if there was someone who was interested in being a backup admin. I want MyFlightbook to be a community owned and community run service. It is open source already. So a couple of things that I don't want to do today. I'm not going to be giving basic tutorials. I'm not going to go super deep in any specific feature. And I'm not planning to give product support. If you have a particular problem or something, just contact me offline, myflightbook@gmail.com. And so I've got 9 different areas that I've largely grouped. You know, these are kind of disparate, different tips. But I've grouped them into data entry, searching, printing. There's a bunch of stuff around aircraft and customization. I'm not going to talk too much about import, but there were just a few things in there that I think are interesting. There's some fun stuff in mapping. There are some hidden reports that people ask me for, and I point them to it, and they're like, wow, how did I not see that? Which, okay, shame on me for not having it more obvious. And then I do want to talk about some of the stuff on the mobile apps. And hopefully that'll be about 45 minutes, and we'll have time for Q&A. And I am going to record this and post it up. So if you don't want to be in the recording, stay muted and do something by chat or contact me on myflightbook@gmail.org. So with that, why don't I dive in? First thing for data entry, I figured I'd make sure everybody knew about crossfill. And so here I'm very simple, but on this is mostly going to be on the website. I'll show how to do this on the mobile apps a little later. But any place where there is a time field, you'll see this little gray arrow next to the field. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And if you just click that, it will cross-fill whatever is in the total time field. And that works whether you're in the main form here or in the list of additional properties down here, like solo time. If I click on that, that'll just copy it over. Tachometer and Hobs do the same thing, but they're a little bit special. When you click that, that's going to actually go up to the server, look at all of your flights in the currently selected aircraft, and find the high water mark ending TAC or ending Hobs, and use that as the starting one. So obviously that's a GA specific feature, but it's a nice little way to get, especially if you're the only one who's flying a plane on a regular basis. That helps you get that started. When you submit a new flight, it should also pre-fill the starting Hobs or starting TAC with the previous ending Hobs or TAC, at least on the mobile apps. So it just saves a little bit of time. But another thing that you can do, especially if they're aircraft that you fly on a frequent basis, is you can, if you go to the list of your aircraft and you go over to the little pop menu next to it, there's a bunch of autofill options. And so what these will do is, for any flight that you save in this aircraft, it will autofill your total time to either the CFI time, the PIC time, or the SIC time, if it is otherwise 0. So if you have a 2-hour flight and you are PIC for 1 hour of it, and you put 1 hour in that flight, no crossfill will happen. But this can be really handy, like if you're doing instruction in a plane all the time, or if you're always flying your own plane. I think I have this on 40 Foxtrot Golf. There it is. Yeah, so if PIC is empty, set it equal to the total time. And you can even have it explicitly add your name as the pilot in command for any flight that you log in that aircraft, if you haven't already specified the pilot's name. And then the one other thing I'll show here for data entry tips is that any of the fields like name of PIC or safety pilot name that you've used before will autocomplete to previously used values. And so that's a real time saver if you're always putting in your name as the name of a PIC, or if you're always flying with somebody, student name, instructor name, things like that. So you just have to type in a few characters and it'll autocomplete, and then you can pick from a list. But perhaps the biggest feature around data entry is templates. And this is something I took out last year. And you can see, you may all be familiar, hopefully, with the big list of properties that you can add to a flight. I'm close to 700 different properties that you can add to a flight. And that's just way too many. And so by default down here, it shows your previously used properties, anything that you've ever used on a previous flight. So the idea is, if you're in the military and you do a carrier landing, you probably do a lot of carrier landings. But if you're like me, you've never done one and you never will, and so that would just be clutter. And so I'm trying to make a good guess about what is and isn't a useful property to show. But with templates, you can control this on a much more fine-grained level. And so you can specify, for example, a template for an introductory flight lesson, the things that you might want to cover, ground instruction, maneuvers, climbing and descending turns, or you might have aerobatics training, or you might have a check ride that you can do to make sure that you cover all the relevant steep turns and things like that. And the neat thing about templates is that they're layered. They add. You can have multiple templates at a time. So here I have both my club template and my lesson plan template showing, and so they both just add. And so if I go over to, let me do it in a new window here. You can set up a template by going to Profile, Preferences, and then going to Flight Properties and Templates, and then they're down here. And you can either browse a set of available templates, because there's a bunch that people have shared, and you can just click to add it to your template, or you can create your own. And what that looks like is you give it a name, my template, you give it a description, commonly used properties, and then you can just drag and drop the properties that you want to show for that template, and then you save it. There we go. And now that should be available. If I say, where did that go? Oh, I got to. Actually, did that not go in? There it is, my template. So here it is. It shows up, so it's under training. And if I go in here and I reload the page, that should pick it up. So here, sorry, the thing keeps, my template. And if I turn that on, that was, that included the, come on. There we go. So that included the 180-degree power off accuracy landings and the additional crew members. And that you can see that added on to the other ones. But there are a few special templates. One special template that's used by default is previously used, and that's the one that shows all the properties that you've ever attached to a flight before. Another one is simulator, and that one is actually tied to any aircraft that is a sim. So when I pick a sim up here, it's automatically, let me turn off the other templates that are on. It's automatically going to turn on ground instruction received and the simulator training device identifier, because those are properties that you typically want to have with a sim flight. And so it knows when you have a sim that you should enter that data. Similarly, if you're flying an anonymous aircraft, so this is, you know, I fly a different Boeing 737 every day, it will give you an aircraft registration property. So you can put in the tail number of that day's 737. So that way you don't have to have 58,000 aircraft in your aircraft list. But along those lines, you can also have a template per aircraft. So for example, the three middle aircraft here, 39er Juliet, 30322, and 40 Foxtrot Golf, are all in my club, my flying club. And so I have, by default, a club flight VFR template set for them. So when I pick those aircraft as the aircraft to use for a flight, it will automatically pull in the properties from that template, which is name of PIC, oil added, safety pilot. And the nice thing about that is, since I'm in a club environment, that actually will feed into a report for the club. So there's a lot you can do to customize the set of fields that you see on a per aircraft basis or on a per mission basis. The other thing you can do, just for completeness, is you can mark a template as being default, which means, so if you check the default box or multiple default, then for any new flight in an airplane that doesn't otherwise have a template assigned, those are the templates that will be used. So let me move on a little bit to some tips on telemetry. So first thing I'll show here is that I've got a sample flight in here that goes from Seattle to Heathrow. And I put in an engine start and an engine time, but I didn't put anything else in. So MyFlightbook can autofill this. If you're using the mobile apps, it can do it in real time based on the GPS, or you can autofill after the fact. So this is an example of autofilling after the fact, where all I have is my engine start and my engine end. And if I click autofill, it'll think about it for a second. And because I have just 2 airports, it's going to create, and it has a Zulu time start and end. It can synthesize a great circle path between Seattle and Heathrow and figure out how much of that path was below the sun, being 6 degrees below the horizon, so being nighttime. It figures out that the landing would have been daytime in London. Here's the total time, and I can then cross-fill it as appropriate. If I had the actual flight path in GPX format, KML format, I actually support also NMEA, IGC, which is a glider format, and just straight CSV or spreadsheet, like what you can download out of your Garmin. Then I could select that file here. And if I do that and then click autofill, it will use that path to get very precise measurement of when did you take off, when did you land, where did you land. And in fact, it can then fill in the route for you, and it can get very precise about how much of your flight was at night and things like that. It will use flight time if you use it. It will use block time if you use that. And you can actually control a bunch of how this works. If you look at this little menu next to the autofill button, you can pick the speed that it should use as a takeoff speed, and it estimates a landing speed based on that. You can decide whether or not heliports are included. That can reduce noise for if you're flying fixed wing. You can ask it to estimate night, in which case it'll try to do the synthesis that I described. If you have an actual telemetry path, then it won't do that. You can have it round to the nearest 10th of hour, and you can also decide whether you're using FAA or other rules about how to record night flight. By default, I use FAA, which is that night flight is between civil twilight, and that night landings have to be an hour after sunset. But you can adjust those rules as well. So those are some tips for data entry. Let me move on to searching. So I have pretty robust searching on the site And it's a lot more than just free-form text. So I'm not going to go into what it can do. My goal in making it sort of a very structured search is to make sure that I have very little in the way of false positives and false negatives, that when you type a search term, you know exactly what you're going to get. But even within that, there are some ways that you can narrow the results and get a little bit more precise. So the first is in the text box. By default, everything that you type in here is case insensitive, and it's any word. So if you search for the word, if you type in angel flight, then it's going to find any flight that has the word angel in it, and any flight and has the word has the word angel and the word flight in it. Doesn't matter what order, and it can be part of other words. So if that will actually match a flight that has a comment of flight to Los Angeles, because that has both flight and angel in it. So I borrowed the Google model of doing queries here. So if I type angel flight, that will find both angel flight and flight to Los Angeles. But if I put that in quotes, now it will only find angel flight. So as a phrase. You can also use the word or. So if you do angel or flight, that means that it will find any flight that has the word angel in it or the word flight in it. You can also put a minus sign next to a word that you don't want. So that will find flights that have the word angel but don't have the word flight. And this field will search within the values of your comment, your roots, or any other text field that you've added. So let's see. The next thing I was going to show was in models. You can check a bunch of models. So if you want to be very precise about, I want to find all my flights that were in a 777-200 but not a 777-300, you can do that by, just with the check boxes. But it can often be easier to just say, hey, I want to find all my 172 flights. I don't care whether it was a 172N or a 172P. And so you can use the ICAO designation for that. You can either just type model contains 172, and that will probably work, or you can be more precise and type model contains ICO C172, because all of the 172s are ICAO. You know, on the flight form, you would do a C172 or B736 or you know, A320, whatever it is. The other thing that I should note is that when you do a freeform search in the search box, it will also search in any private notes that you've put in aircraft. And so that can be a useful way if you want to make notes about which aircraft are de-iced. You can put a tag into the private notes for that aircraft, and then if you search for de-ice, here it will find only flights that were in that in aircraft with that matched. So sometimes you want to set up a query. Maybe you have a report that you need to do for your employer or for insurance, and it's a pain to do over and over. Well, what you can do is just before you click Find Matching Flights, there's a pop menu here, and you can give the query a name and just type it in, and then when you click Find Matching Flights, it will save that query for you. And so when you come back, you can just pick from the list. So if I want to see my angel flights, I can just click on angel flights here because I have a saved query for that. And think. There we go. And so this is, in this case, my search is just on the word angel. And of course, I can, because these search filters are additive, I can just click the little red X to remove that that filter, and now I'm back to all of my flights. The one other thing that can be handy as a quick search for finding flights is down here in the pager bar. If you see where it says 1 of 40, you can type a bunch of different things here. I can type a page number, so I can type page 10 to go to the 10th page out of 40 of my logbook. There we go. Or I can type a date, and that date can either be a simple year. If I want to see what was my flying in 2003, for example, I can type 2003. And you can see here is 2003 through 2004. Or I can say I want to find a flight that was somewhere in 2015, let's say. And so I can do month, year. And if I type that in, it'll quickly take me to that section of my logbook. So I go back on, I've got my iPad over here with my PowerPoint here. Any questions so far? Why don't I pause here and take any questions?
Eric, I don't have a question, but I wanted to say you're insane on how much detail you go into. At 6 degrees below the horizon and calculating that while, during the flight and determining in the nighttime. Jesus criminy. Great job. Fantastic.
Well, for a long time, I resisted doing the night calculation because the problem is Seattle to Heathrow is a great example. That flight on, even if you assume Great Circle, that flight on June 20th has a vastly different amount of night flight than it does on December 20th. And so, doing it, on a milk run between San Francisco and LA, you can approximate it pretty easily. But the errors can accumulate, and so you kind of have to do that.
Yeah, but as a programmer, a pilot, and understanding, mapping, that's insane. I can't even imagine you even attempted that. But great job. Where to get the data, how often does it update, all of those third and fourth issues that come up. Fantastic job, man.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Eric, this is Stan. I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd like to say thanks as well. I've been on MyFlightbook since 2017, but I actually only really started using it in the last few weeks, and I am also amazed. But I do have a question. So when I log a flight, it turns out I've got a couple of flights that I do regularly that are under 100 miles if you fly direct. But because I'm in Colorado, I don't fly direct. I fly around a lot of mountains and fly through passes. So then I try to add like, a waypoint or another airport to kind of show a different flight. That then takes it over 100 miles, 100 nautical miles. And in my particular case, it's 137 nautical miles. So when I click in the templates for a flight over 100 nautical miles and I add that flight, I still get an error message saying that this is less than 100 miles. And I think it's calculating the direct flight and not somehow including the fact that I've added a waypoint that takes me over 100. So what's going on there?
Let's take that on to email, and because there are a few details I'd want to understand about how you're logging that. The quick answer is it should be okay if you actually use a waypoint and the waypoint is in the system. It should compute the distance, but otherwise, yeah, I'm just looking at the route of flight and saying, is that 100 miles or not? I might be looking end to end and ignoring. I'll email me and we can dive into the specific flight, and maybe I need to tweak my my check there.
Okay, thanks. I'll email that to you. Appreciate it.
So I wanted to show some stuff in the aircraft. So as you all know, MyFlightbook is very aircraft dependent. You don't log complex time. You don't log turbine time, because I can just look at the aircraft and its model and figure out a ton of stuff from that. And so that's why I require you to put the aircraft into the system before you log a flight. But there's a lot going on in here. And I wanted to show some of the more interesting things. So when I come in, so here's the plane I fly the most. It's a Mooney, and it tells you some interesting stats. I thought this was worth pointing out. So this one's used by 28 different pilots in over 1,000 flights. There's a link here. I can simply click it to see all my flights in this aircraft. I've flown it in 458 flights between 2000 and 2020, and I've got 849 hours in it. And I'll show in a few minutes how you can actually get more detailed stats across all of your aircraft. This particular aircraft has, it was originally steam gauge because it was 1994, I think, is when the plane, I should know that, when the plane was made. But we upgraded it in 2016. So it is now a technically advanced aircraft. What's interesting here is that I can put in the date of the upgrade. It was in December of 2016. And so the system will now distinguish flights before and after that date as being technically advanced and not technically advanced. Any flight before December 1st of 2016 will be treated as a steam gauge flight. Any flight after December of 2016 will be treated as a technically advanced airplane. You may have all seen that of course you can upload images for aircraft, and that's nice because if you're flying an airplane that somebody else is flying and they add a picture, you get that picture, which is kind of cool, especially for planes that you flew years and years ago, maybe that have been destroyed. But I wanted to show that not only can you delete a picture, please don't for shared aircraft, unless it's inappropriate or something, but it works the same way as you can for a flight. And you can edit it to add a comment. But for aircraft, especially where you have multiple pictures, you might decide, ooh, I like this picture better. There's a little star here. If you click the star, that makes it your favorite. And now that one's going to be the aircraft, the picture that I use for this aircraft by default. You can also upload PDFs for aircraft, which is a nice way. Here I've got the checklist, I've got the G500 and the G750 reference guides in here, so that you can have access to that from wherever, and that's, it's just up in the cloud. It's just easy to gain access to. If we go down a little bit further, there are public notes. These are visible to anybody who flies the airplane. So this is one of our club aircraft. So here we're putting in the hangar number that we have 3 aircraft and we have 3 hangars and we do maintenance in one, so we're constantly shuffling them around. So here you can always see which hangar is this airplane in. But there's also private notes. And so earlier I mentioned things like de-ice or Garmin versus Avidyne, whatever it is about an aircraft that you want to make a note of. Put in whatever you like here. I recommend using a hashtag prefix just to avoid false positives or false positives and false negatives when you search. So if you have pound de-ice, for example, then if you search for pound de-ice, you're not gonna get something where for whatever reason you use the word de-ice in your comments. And you can put whatever you like here, but these notes are private to you. If the aircraft is in a club, you get a schedule. I'm not talking about clubs today, so I'm going to go past that. Clubs might be an interesting talk to do. You can also do maintenance and inspections. And so I have the basic regulatory ones here, your Aviate ones, and it'll compute based on the last date that an inspection was done, when it will next need to be done. Some of these are a little bit squishy. You do your oil change. You don't have to change it at 25 hours, but I tell you when you will want to change it if you want 25 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours. We put in this case, when was the last engine done, so we can estimate when it'll be due for a new engine. We can put in a renewal date for the aircraft's registration. Add any notes if I update things. So for example, if I do a VOR check, I can put in the error, the place, the method, and my name. And all of these changes, whoever makes a change to the maintenance does get recorded down here in a maintenance log. And you can see who did it, when, and what the change was. So here, you update database, due date updated from January 2nd to January 30th. But one of the cool things that you can do here, so and all of these maintenance items are shared among every pilot who uses the, who flies the aircraft, but it won't cover your currency unless you actually make a change here, which indicates that you do some sort of maintenance on the aircraft or fly it on a regular basis. And it will also, it has to be in an aircraft that's active. But I wanted to show deadlines here. You can create deadlines that are tied not to your account, but tied to the airplane. So here, for this aircraft, I have two deadlines. I have a recurring 28-day deadline to update the Garmin database. And so that one is due based on a date. Every 28 days, the calendar clicks and the deadline gets closer. But there's a second deadline here that we have to do for an AD for the, or maintenance schedule for our new prop from when we upgraded the engine. And we have to grease it every 100 hours of flight. And so this, we say, you know, the deadline is, if we were creating it here, we'd say the deadline is determined using aircraft hours, not a date. And so obviously I can't predict when it's due based on hours because that depends on how much the aircraft is going to fly. But I can put in the hours when it was last done and how much more it has to be. And then when you edit the when you go to edit the deadline, so if I were to update the database today, for example, I would click update and it would compute the new expiration or the new hours at which it should be that the deadline is due. So those are some of the deep things inside aircraft at an individual aircraft level. But I wanted to show a couple of things at the broad level as well. One is the idea that you can, I already showed the crossfill, I already showed templates, but I hadn't shown what was up here on the top, which is active versus inactive aircraft. And it's really simple. Active aircraft are ones that you fly on a regular basis. Inactive aircraft, you don't. They're, you know, historical aircraft. And if you have a lot of inactive aircraft, the nice thing is it reduces the clutter here when you're adding a new flight, and it reduces clutter here when you're searching for aircraft. So by default, it's just going to show you your active aircraft. You can still get to all of your aircraft, active or not, but it greatly reduces the clutter. But you can also sort your aircraft up here by tail number or by its model. And by model, that's a full model. You know, PA 108-2 for a Stinson, A5, you know, B767-400. If you do it by ICAO designation, that'll be the much shorter 4-character one. But let me show this one down here, recency of flight. This is a slower one, which is one of the reasons it's not default. But now this goes through all of your flights in all of your aircraft and will now show you all of your stats here. So my anonymous C-172, I've flown it in one flight today. This is one of the ones I set up for the demo. Here's my Mooney. So these are from most recent to least recent, and for each one, it's got the number of flights and the date range and hours for that. And if I want to, I can download all of this into a spreadsheet. Will that open in numbers? Let's see. I just realized I'm on my Mac and I don't have Excel on my Mac. There we go. And so this shows you all of your aircraft. And what's cool is it's got all the maintenance in here and all of those stats that I described right here. So public notes, private notes, how many, oh, you probably can't see this, can you? Okay, hold on. Boom, boom. Share screen, numbers, share. There we go. So way over here on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet, here's my flight count. Here are how many hours I have in that aircraft. Here's the first flight I have in it, and here's the last flight I have in that aircraft. So I think that's kind of fun. It can be useful for insurance purposes, and it can be useful for club reporting, and it can be useful for employers as well. All right, that's aircraft. Let me just show a few printing tips. There's not a lot I don't want to spend a lot of time on printing, but one I do want to show is that you can use Markdown, a very simplified form of Markdown. So if you use asterisks, people nod your head if you can see the screen. I just want to make sure that okay, good. If you use asterisks around text, it will boldface it. If you use underscores on either side of it, it will italic. And you can do links by putting the text you want to display in square brackets. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger, make it easier for people to see. So you can, and then you put the actual link in parentheses, and then those will be shown as boldface, and you see how it hid the URL. So you can format do simple formatting on your text. Just makes it look a little nice, especially when you're printing. The other thing you can do is use 3 forward slashes to cut out the cruft from the printed view. So if you just want, you don't need to show, if you're doing an application for an airline job, you don't need to talk about the hamburger that you got at the restaurant on the field or any of that, but you might still want that in your logbook. So just for performance, I'm going to go for a short flight here, or a short search here, just the last 12 months. I'm going to go to printing. I could probably do most of a talk on printing, but the key things are I have 9 different layouts that you can choose from, and if there are others that you want me to do, just send me a screenshot and I'll see what I can do. You can control whether to include pictures and signatures. You can specify how many flights you want per page before you get subtotals, and whether or not to break down those subtotals by category and class. I should just actually show this, but the key thing here is that this link here, if you bookmark it, it will remember all of the settings that you've done. So that's a quick way to get back to this information, or get back to a print setting here. Let me shrink that a little bit back. And so you can see, if I go down to my sample flights for today where I used Markdown, see here it says this flight uses Markdown to show how links work, and I had those 3 slashes. The text after those 3 slashes isn't shown here. But you can also see, for example, I have all the totals per page broken out by category and class, and then subtotaled by all. And so I can, for example, turn that off, and that'll just reduce the clutter a little bit. I also have a full display of the model for each aircraft. So this is a PA-28. I can make that be more compact, like a 172S or something like that, or just use the ICAO designation, so a P-28A. And I can add up to 4 additional columns. So if I want to break out my complex time or my FTD time, or have separate columns for multi-engine and single engine or things like that, I can do that. That's most of what I wanted to say on printing. So let me go on to customization. A couple of things worth pointing out here. One is if I go into preferences, and if I go into currency, there's this option here. When a currency is expired, display it for, and it can be forever, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. So a good example for me is my seaplane rating, my seaplane currency is about 5 years out of date, and my multi-engine currency is about 2 years out of date. If I can make my currency just a lot more compact by just trimming those out. By default, MyFlightbook computes every possible currency for you and trims out anything where you haven't been current. but then it'll go one step further and trim out anything where you haven't been current for longer than you wanted. You can also have it show currency on a category, class, and type basis, which is what 61.57 does, 6157A and 6157B. But in a lot of the world, they actually want you doing that on a per model basis. So being current in a Cherokee does not make you current in a Skyhawk. So you can do that if you like. The other thing under decluttering is totals. So by default, I show things like your complex time and your tailwheel time and your turbine time, and you can turn that on or off here. And then let me go over back to the logbook page. You may notice that this is a pretty compact view. There's a menu up here. I personally like using the compact view. If you use, if you uncheck that, then I show everything for the flight in line, but that can get a little bit busy. But you can turn on compact view, in which case you get a little plus minus thing to expand and collapse. You can also show images in line. There's also an option here to select flights. I'll just show that while I'm here. I think I forgot to put that on my list. And so this is a good way to do multiple selection. If you want to delete multiple flights but don't want to delete everything, you can select those flights and then you can request signatures or delete them. Those are basically the only two options that you can do with select flights. But like if you said, oh, I did a bad import of my flights from last week. It's just the last 7 days of flights. You could do a search for the last 7 days of flights and then do a select all and delete them, and that would safely delete just the flights that match the search that you did.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
I've got a print question for you.
Sure.
Pretty commonly, if you get called on the carpet by the FAA on some kind of an investigation, they may ask just enough of your logbook to show currency.
Okay.
It's going to include your last flight review, your 6 and 6 and whatever. Is there a way to kind of do that other than say, just give me the past year or the past 6 months?
Yes. For now, to the degree you just named 2 or 3 things, your flight review and your passenger currency, for example. These are now clickable, but because they're actually, all the regulatory currencies are actually pretty complicated. So I'm just doing for the single engine land, I'm just doing 90 days, flights that have landings, and category class is not, is in the relevant category. Oh, there's another tip here that I was going to point out later, which is if you use the pilot monitoring whole flight property, then I ignore any landings that you log for that flight. So it's just, if you're an instructor and you don't want to count the landings, you might use that. Or if you were the pilot monitoring, you can still put the landings in your logbook, but they won't contribute to currency. Anyhow, so here I clicked, these are my flight currency things. And if I go printing and open a printer, optimize view of my logbook, you can see it carried over that query. Okay. So that's how you would do that. I'm going to go over to some mapping tips, and this may actually go to the earlier question a little bit. We all know that I can type in KSFO to Yakima, for example, just to pick 2 airports, and I click map, great, there it maps it. But what's interesting is that suppose I want to specify the Yakima VOR. If I just type YKM, that's doing the actual, I mean, they're just synonyms for Yakima Airport. But the VOR is actually a little ways off of the airport. So I can use the @ prefix to say, no, I want the VOR. And now if I map it, you can see the airport is over here on the left and the VOR is over here on the right. So to that 100-mile question, that might be one way to solve it. I have to look at the code and see if I'm including VORs. You can also put in a latitude, longitude using at notation. So you could say, let me make this a little bigger. I don't know if it's a little hard for people to read. So you could say at 45.23 north, 122.34 west. And that creates a new waypoint at that latitude, longitude. I can even use equals greater than to make a little arrow to have a disjoint flight. So if I have a flight from A to B and then a flight from C to D without the flight from B to C, let's say, Seattle to Portland, just to make things up. If I use that arrow, I can break those up into two separate flights. You can also, yeah, I think those are the main things I wanted to show here. There's also, here is deep esoterica. Suppose I have a really complicated path like this. If you go up into the URL and at the end of it, you type, you add the, it's hidden under, in my, there we go. TSP equals 1. You add that to the URL. You may need to use an and or a question mark. Then it gives you this little optimized route button. And I did this for fun, but this solves the traveling salesman problem for your path. So here I have a convoluted route with a bunch of Washington State airports in it. If I click optimize route, it now just gave me more or less the shortest path that hits all of those airports starting at the starting airport. Just kind of fun. The other thing I wanted to show here is that just because I'm cheap, I'm a free service, so I am cheap. If you don't have a path on your flight and you click on the route of flight, it gives you a static map. And those are really cheap from Google. So I can't pan this and I can't zoom this. If you have a more complicated flight or you have telemetry attached, then I give you the zoomable, panable map. Or if you have pictures on the on the flight. But if you go up again into the URL and add DM for dynamic maps equals 1, then I give you the panable, zoomable map. It costs me a little bit more with Google Maps. Yeah, I mean, a fraction of a penny, but they add up. So I'll just offer that as a tip and trick if you're wondering why you can't pan or zoom. Let me go to some of my hidden reports, and then we'll go over to the mobile apps. One thing that people sometimes ask for is an airline report. So if I go into the 8710 report,
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
and come on. So this simulates the FAA's 8710 report, but I have an option here, roll up by model. And this gives you the data that apparently airlineapps.com likes to use, where they have how much time you have in the last 12 and 24 months, how many approaches have you done in the last 6 or 12 months, how much military time do you have, how much simulated time do you have. And they want it broken down by ATD, FTD, and then by model. So this report gives you all of that.
Hey, Eric, quick question on that, real quick.
Sure.
I sent you an email a couple nights ago about the roll-up by model. It wasn't picking up my flight engineer time. You got that written down somewhere, right?
I did. I replied to you on that.
Okay, good. I'll see it. Thanks.
Yeah. I already showed you the aircraft report. I'm not going to do the club report. But one of the cool things that I will show is if you go into analysis, and you can see all of your flying. So here, total flight time by year. How much simulated instrument do I have by month, let's say. And you can group a whole bunch of different things by a whole bunch of different values. And what's kind of cool is that if you click here where it says click here, you can see all of that data grouped by whatever you're grouping it by. And you can actually click on that to do a search. Oh, October 1996. Click on that. Let me see that. And you can download it into a spreadsheet. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on past that. Let me go into the mobile apps and just show a few things in here, because I know somebody asked about that. So I am going to
Hey, Eric. Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
So, do you have any thoughts or plans to maybe make like a switch in there for putting in your routes, where you could just kind of drop in a filed flight plan and it would work? Because I know sometimes you have the VOR and the airport is separate like that, but if you put in the whole route or even like a Victor Airway or something, that it could map that.
No, and so I do let you upload your planned flights, and you can put those into pending flights, and there might be a whole separate talk there.
Right. Yeah, it's different.
But I can't tell if you're going A, B, C, D, E. Are you actually, for example, doing a training flight where you're going to fly at all of to all of those? If you put in the @ signs, you can certainly do that.
Yeah.
That tells me. And I don't have Victor Airways, but one of the key things is I'm not a flight planner, so I don't promise that I have the most up-to-date, every 56 days data. And I don't have Victor Airways and all of the approaches and arrivals and departures in the system. You can put that in, but I won't be able to do much with it.
Okay. No, that's fine. And then I had one other question. I think you're kind of maybe moving towards it, but I think I had asked you a while ago, but any thoughts on the app being able to contain your logbook? So if you're offline, you could pull up your log.
Yeah, that's one of the things I may take advantage of lockdown to do that. I've been doing a ton of cleanup work on the website, but maybe it's time to actually dive into that one so that you can at least view cached data when you are offline. That's finally getting to the top of my list. So with that, actually, let me spend the last few minutes on the mobile apps. So one of the cool things about the mobile apps is that they can fill in stuff for you automatically. I hope you can all see this is my iPhone. It works the same way. The UI is slightly different, but it works the same way on Android. But if you go into settings, you can turn on, the key settings are auto detection of takeoff and landings. It's not a bad idea to record your flight data, but you don't need to do that. Not a bad idea to record high resolution, but you don't need to do that. You can specify a takeoff speed. You can specify your night flying option. So this is the same as what I showed on the website, and whether to include heliports. And then anything between when you do engine start to engine stop, the app will listen to the GPS. I'm not going to do it here because this is my emulator, and it'll actually it actually emulates a GPS on this. Well, okay, why don't I? So you can see, you press engine start, and it's reading the GPS, and it tells you how much time has elapsed and whether you're in flight and on the ground and so forth. If you notice this little green pause button that shows up here, that's a pause play button. So if you fly somewhere for your lunch, you can, or for fuel, you can pause it and then press play to resume the flight when you're done. And when you're done with the flight, you press engine stop, and it'll fill in everything that it auto detected for the flight. And you can see here it filled in the total time and stuff. Don't pay attention to the fact that it's wrong. This is my development environment, and it's an emulator, not a real iPhone. But this is what I do on every one of my flights. And so when I land, my route of flight is already filled in, the number of landings, my day full stop, my night full stop, my night landing time. Everything else is filled in for me. One thing that I do need to do is fill in approaches, so I'll quickly show that. If I click here where it says approaches, there's a little plus button. If I click on that, I have an approach helper. And so if I say I had 2 approaches, and I can say those were ILS approaches to runway 7 right at, and then it even here should know, it's letting me type in, oh right, I'm doing autocomplete. It'll autocomplete to the airports that are in my list of in the route of flight. And then here, because I've checked add to total approach count, when I hit back, it's added an approach here, or 2 approaches, because I said 2 approaches, and it added under approach names 2 ILS runway 7 right at KPAE. There are a whole bunch of places where you can press and hold to do shortcuts here. One of these is in these properties. If you can do templates, all the stuff I showed you with templates, you can do by clicking on that little eye thing. But maybe you just want to add a property here. If you press and hold, it gets a little star. Now it's stuck to the new flight screen. If you press and hold, the star goes away. All the cross-fill. If you press and hold, it'll do a cross-fill from the total, same as before, and same as on the web. It'll do Hobbs and it'll do total for that. If you press and hold, if you press the little plus sign next to the route, it'll append your nearest airport to your route of flight. But if you press and hold that, it'll add your latitude, longitude using that at latitude, longitude notation that I showed. If you press and hold the date up here, it'll set the date of flight to either today or to the first takeoff, whichever is, if your first takeoff is specified, it'll set to that. It'll set that in local time though, but first takeoff, of course, is in UTC. And then finally, probably the most hidden one here is that if you fly a bunch of legs during a day, you might want a time calculator. So if you press and hold total, it has a time calculator. And this is on both Android and iOS. And so if I say I had a segment that started at 10:15 and ended at 11:30, I'm going to add that. So that just added an hour 15. And then I had another one from 12:10 to 13:52. I can say add. Great. Now I can copy that to the clipboard, the 2.97, or I can hit update, and now that just copied it into the total time.
Eric,
routes,
quick question for you, if you don't mind. Back there on the approaches, I had this the other day, and it's probably just something that I'm missing. You put in there, you created 2 approaches, but you made them both be ILS. Let's say I did 2 approaches, and I did 1 ILS and 1 GPS. I'm sorry, yeah, 1 ILS, 1 GPS. How do I notate 2 different types of approaches in there?
Oh, here, let me do that. So I've done 2 ILSs. Let's add in an RNAV GPS. Let's even make it an RNAV A to runway 16 right at KPAE. But there was only 1 GPS approach and the 2 ILSs. So, and I say add to approach count. Now the approaches have bumped up to 3. And down in approach names, I have 2 ILS runway 7 and 1 RNAV GPS alpha to runway 16 right.
Okay, so you just press the plus sign next to it to create an additional type, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly what I did. I'm going to do one more tip, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A.
I have a question too.
Oh, sure.
Good to finally put a face to the name, by the way. Back in the new flight entry, when you press and hold in the nighttime, it just copies the total time. Is there a way to auto-calculate that, and how do you do it? There
are 2 ways to do it on the mobile app. Yeah, you're right. If I press and hold, that's a cross-fill. That press and hold is cross-fill. If I want it to compute, I have to do it in one of 2 ways. One, I do it in real time using the auto detection and the GPS and just let the system fill it in. The system will keep track of how much of your flight is at night. The other is if I have a GPX file that I get from 4Flight, from my Garmin, from some other source, from my Bad Elf, then you can use the send feature on iOS and on, I think this works on Android too, and you send that to the MyFlightbook app. MyFlightbook will ask you, do you want to initialize an app from this, a flight from this, and it will read the GPX file as if it were real-time GPS and do all of the auto-filling based on that.
Okay, but as a airline pilot in the airline environment, when I block in and I'm updating my block times, it sounds like, because I can't be messing with my phone, you know, once the door's closed. So I would just have to wait until I get back to my computer and just do the autofill that way?
Yeah. And if you did autofill, by the way, that is a third way, is on the computer. If you do autofill, it will fill in the nighttime, but there are 2 constraints on that. One is you have to have exactly 2 fields in the route. If you have 3 or more, then I can't tell how much of the flight was at night. And the other is I need a Zulu time start and finish. And so that can be either block time, it can be engine time, it can be flight time, but it can fill any of those in.
Okay, thanks.
It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to stop there. There were a few things I didn't cover, but that's okay. Are there other questions that people want me to cover or show?
Hey, it's Mike. I do have a few questions.
Sure.
I'm airline as well. So just kind of to go along with that, more or less for tags, is there a way to add in a slot for like the company name? Normally I do like the flight number, the company name, all in the comments, and then the person I'm flying with. Is there a way to add in like a slot for the flight number or like gate returns and like just kind of odd stuff like that?
Yes, an awful lot of those are already in the list of additional properties for a flight. Let me share the screen again. I can give you some names on that.
I haven't messed around with it as much as I should have probably, but.
So if you go, if you click, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so if you click the little magnifying glass here, for example, there's crew, and so there are places to put the names of crew members. Flight number, I know, is one of them. If you type flight number, there we go. Okay. Flight number, and you can create a template for these, if and then it'll be there by default. I think I even have employer, employer name.
Oh wow! All right.
I don't know if there are others that you wanted, but if anything's missing, just ask me. So, this whole properties thing, it's a little bit wonky, I admit. Even calling them properties, that's a computer science geek name for these things. But the idea is that I have the core set of fields that every logbook on the planet has, cross country, total, PIC. But there's just so much other stuff for different kinds of flying, and I can add these in moments and make them live in moments, and it's no big deal. So if there are things that you'd like to see, my general rule of thumb is just I like to make them sort of generic. So for example, I don't have angel flight, but I have charity flight and things like that. And it usually should be something where, you actually want to break that out from the comments, so you can do things like that chart I showed you. You could group that based on employer name if you wanted.
Right, yeah.
And see how much flying did you do for Delta, and how much did you do for Southwest, and how much did you do for whomever.
Yep. Kind of along with that, can you go into properties of an airplane, like category, or more or less the type of the airplane for 121 to tag like a 121 onto it? Is that an option?
Well, that 121 is not really an attribute of the airplane. That's more of an attribute of the flying that you do.
Right, yeah.
So yes, you can do that, and again, you can group by that as well. So I have part, so part 121 flight, part 135 flight. I have a part 91 flight, 91K. So you can identify flights as being conducted under different sets of rules.
Okay. One last one then.
Sure.
For currency, is there an attribute for recurrent ground and sim? Because I know I go into currency, and a lot of times it doesn't show that it's current, but obviously you are. Is there a currency button for a 121 recurrent?
I don't think I've got one built in.
Yes.
So this has to be in a
There's
SIM.
one in there.
Oh, there is two.
Search under AQP.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Oh, you guys know this better than I do. The other thing that you can do is I do have AQP. Yeah, there we are. Line operation evaluation, maneuver validation. But if you have a specific requirement that needs to be done, like I need to do time in a sim, you can create a custom currency rule here. And it's reasonably rich in what you can do, where you have to do at least or at most so many different operations within a particular time period, in a particular kind of airplane, or in a particular aircraft or model of aircraft, or that contains specific text or specific properties. So you can get pretty detailed and pretty rich in doing that.
Okay. Oh, that's it for me. Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question for the airline pilots that are here. I've got a little over 1,300 hours hoping to, once the virus gets through and everything, to make it into the airlines. Just general question, if you guys have had any problems with the airlines accepting MyFlightbook as your, logbook of record and stuff, or anything like that.
I would keep a paper one too, but you could always print it.
I do that. I still keep paper logbooks for interviews and whatnot too, just because I don't have a printed version currently, and I still kind of prefer the paper ones. I keep the electronic, the paper, and then my little one in the logbook in the airplane as well.
But I would think if you printed Eric's in a format that is acceptable by the potential employer, they would accept that.
I don't see why they wouldn't either.
Yeah.
As long as everything's up to date, signed, and it's in the format that you want, it is an official logbook. As long as
I've completely switched over, and so that was kind of what I was hoping, is that everything says that they should accept it and everything, but I know one of the things that I've had people ask on is the signature piece, is that people don't see the signatures for like training and stuff like that for all of them. So I didn't know if that threw up any kind of red flags or anything.
I haven't heard much issue, at least in the United States. Certainly not from employers. There've been a couple of officious regulatory types here and there, but the FAA has AC 120-78, which describes electronic records and signatures and what's acceptable best practices within the FAA environment. So that's not what the airlines necessarily want, but that should be what they take. And I should be compliant with AC 120-78A.
Is there any thought, like, obviously I'm a flight instructor, and I encourage all of my students, pretty much all of my new students, I have them sign up with MyFlightbook, and a lot of them will use a paper logbook and a digital logbook, and I give them the choice, and I say, in the future, if you want to use something else, you're set up that way, and obviously you can export and import and all that kind of stuff. But I start them off using both of them. And then I digitally sign, so it has the little thing next to it that shows that it's been digitally signed and everything. But a lot of people still just feel more comfortable with that signature. And I know that you can do the scribble signature on there if you don't have an account kind of thing, which I've had people do before. But has there been any thought to, if you are an authorized instructor, to save my signature just one time in there, and then basically you aren't saving, if I do 1 million flights with somebody, you aren't saving my signature 1 million times, but you just saved it once, and then when they
sort
go
of like what
back,
DocuSign does. No, that's
Say that again?
Sort of like what DocuSign does.
Yeah, I guess so. And then just save that so that when they print it, if they check a box that says print signature, it prints my signature, a dozen times if I signed them off a dozen times for things.
So to be clear, if you do that scribble and do the printout, you do have the option for it to print the scribble. If it's digitally signed, then it just gives the little certificate thing. But I love the idea of saving the instructor signature. So even if you sign digitally, I can show a signature. I love that idea. I'll put that
Yeah,
on
I think
my
that would be huge because there's plenty of other instructors too where I've showed them your logbook and I'll be like, this is free and it's the best thing since sliced bread. And they'll be like, but what about the signatures? I want the signatures. And I'm like, that's the one thing it doesn't have if you're using it right. But people definitely like that signature.
The funny thing is that the scribble doesn't signify anything. The digital signature with no scribble is actually far more secure and authentic. But we're
Well,
human.
that's what I tell them. I'm like, that means that you're authorized. It has all your information in there. It's way more definitive than a scribble signature that anybody could fill in all the information with. So.
Yeah, it's visual impact.
Yeah. No, I love that idea.
I just want to add one thing about paper versus electronic. I kept up the good fight and I finally gave up the paper logbooks, but having gone to some major conferences, OBAP, NGPA, I've listened to many airlines give their talks and they don't really care. You can give electronic, but when you interview and they're auditing your logbook, they do need to see signatures, however that may be. The personal benefit for me in paper logbooks was being able to audit and catch errors, usually data entry, whether it was paper or electronic, because I'm human and prone to make errors. But now with the airline, through Flicka and CrewTrack, I can print a report. So that is my backup to audit my times to make sure I didn't make any data entry errors. So they don't really care so much, just as long as you have a complete record, you have signatures, and you can justify the time, and it doesn't look like you just went in and added flights to pad your hours.
And to clarify, the signatures they want are the signatures from instructors on sign-offs or your signature on the bottom of each page, attesting, or both?
That's a good point, both. So if you print it, make sure that you're signing each page that you're attesting that it's true and correct. But yeah, I don't know so much about instructional flights, but especially for check rides and endorsements and that kind of thing, they want to see the originals.
Are there, well, first of all, was this at all useful? Oh, good,
Yes.
good.
Absolutely, yeah.
I will post my PowerPoint that you barely saw, but I'll post it. I'll also post a recording of this. Are there other topics that I should do? And I see you have a question. Give me just a moment, and I'll get to the question. But
I would say importing and exporting. I bet you get lots of people to talk about that, right? I know you've talked to me about it before in the past.
Okay.
And maybe the digital signature, you and I had to work with the DPE in the very beginning because he didn't accept it, and you had to educate him.
Mm-hmm.
And you sent me the documents and I gave it to him and everything was fine the next week. And he even works with me. So it wasn't that, that we had a problem about it. He had just never seen it before and I couldn't educate him quick enough to do the check ride that same day. So we had to come back the next week. But now he's educated. So something like that maybe.
Super.
I was lucky enough in that the DPE that I use for my students, he was the one that got me hooked on MyFlightbook years ago. So everybody I take to him that has MyFlightbook, he's like, okay, yep, this is good. Especially, I have to hand it to you, the real selling point as a flight instructor to new students is being able to take them to that training tab and show them their progress of where they are in their training. And if you ever want to, if you have time to show people that, people that are working towards a new license or rating or whatever, that's a huge thing.
I would have thought you'd say the badges that they earn, the achievements page.
Yeah, the badges are neat, but that training progress thing is huge.
Great. Papa, that's all I see for your name. You had a question. I can't hear you though. Yeah. If you type it into the chat box, I'll read it aloud. Give that just a second. It'll be interesting. I wonder if Oshkosh is even going to happen this year.
Mm.
Planning to go out, but
Yeah, this is Stan. I'm really hoping that that one does go. There's been so many other things that have been canceled or delayed.
Well, hopefully things will start slowly opening up over the next month or so. But Oshkosh is a crush of people. That might be a hard one to do within 2 months. It'll be interesting.
Hey, Eric, I do have another question for you while we're waiting for Papa to type in.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm kind of amazed at what you offer here with MyFlightbook. I think it's really fantastic. And I had done a lot of hunting over the last couple of years. For whatever reason, I never seemed to connect up with it. And eventually I did find it. But what happens to MyFlightbook when you decide you don't want to do this anymore? Because there's going to come, that day is going to come. And hopefully it'll be a long time, but wow, you know, there's a lot of people relying on it, and a lot of people, I think a lot of people like it.
I asked him the same question a while back. He's going to give you a great answer, but my thing was, I said, you know, I used to work in IT, and the big question was, what happens if I get hit by a bus one day? So I had asked him, what happens if you get hit by a bus? What's going to happen to MyFlightbook?
What I want to know is what's with all these evil buses going around hitting everybody? Yeah, so a couple of answers on that. From an operational perspective, very little happens because the operational costs are low, and it's all the donations people have been giving. Thank you for those. Have been going into a dedicated bank account that is linked to Google Cloud, so it will continue running for a while. I have backup admins who are pilots who understand both the technology and flying, and they already receive a bunch of the emails. Sometimes if you use the contact me link and you see a reply from me, you'll often see them on the mail that I received. I'd actually love to get some other backup admins if anybody is at all interested in that. I could do a talk on the admin tools. The code is all open source, and I've got a couple of people who have successfully built the app and who could continue with bug fixes and things like that, and work with my backup admins to get access to the production site and do that. So that's if I get hit by a bus. As for interest in this, so I'm in a wonderful position where I don't do this to pay my bills. I have other sources of income. I do this because I have a blast doing it. And so I already go from working on it, 50 hours 1 week to nothing for 2 weeks. Just because I can work on whatever I want to be working on at the moment. My quote unquote day job, I do angel investing in the clean tech sector. Right? I'm a venture capitalist, basically. And the amount of bandwidth that this actually requires of me is not all that great. So I'm not going anywhere for a long time. So Papa's question was, been surprised at how many small foreign airports you have. What are your sources, users, and how do you add more little ones? There's a bunch of free sources that I've used on the internet where I've been able to find data that is publicly available. And yes, you can add your own airports. If you go onto, I'll show you. So if you go to airports and edit airports, you can add your own airports here. So what you do is you zoom on the location where you want to add the airport. I have no idea where I'm looking now, Hermosa, Colorado. You say, oh, look, that used to be some grass strip. And you click on it, it'll add the latitude, longitude there. You give it a code, you give it a name, and you hit add. And it's as simple as that, and it's available to everybody. But I was able to initialize the database with a bunch of publicly available databases. Anything else? It's 20 after. I want to be respectful of people's time.
We don't have anything going on.
Well, great. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, that's the most depressing reasons that have stuck with me. Well, yeah, we've been having crappy weather in Seattle. I've been hoping to get up and get my my instrument currency fades at the end of next month, and I want to go up, but I don't know whether I should or whether I'm in violation or I'm going to get in trouble, or I don't know, or if the FAA is going to extend those rules. I know they extended medical. Mark,
Well, they didn't really extend medical. There's a technicality in there.
Enforcement.
Yeah.
I guess I just thought of one more question. You were talking about approaches earlier. I guess for airline-wise, majority of them, it seems like it goes in streaks, but majority of them are visual approaches. And then certain applications like FedEx and different ones, they'll ask for how many actual approaches or like hand-flown approaches you do. If you select visual approach, or normally I only put in approaches that are GPS or ILSs. Can you put in a visual approach? Will that, like when you search approaches in the past 6 months or 12 months, does the visual count as an approach per the search?
So now you're going to get a peek into my admin. You guys don't get the admin tab. I do.
I only put in the approaches that I actually do for the sole purpose of when I search it,
So
I
there we
want
go.
the ILSs or GPSs, not
Approaches visual will not count. It's just a number, so you
Yep.
can search on it, but those do not count towards your
like instrument currency in a way.
instrument currency. Actually, I don't look at any of these for instrument currency. What I'm looking at for instrument currency is this number right here. I'm just saying, oh, you did 3 approaches. So what I would do in that case is put if you go from A to B and you did a visual approach to B, I would leave 0 in the approaches.
That's what I normally do.
And then you go here, visual, add a visual approach, and you could say 1. That's what I would do.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Eric, this is Stan. While we've been sitting here thinking about what to ask each other, I just did come up with a couple of things.
Sure.
Wing safety and basic med, and how you apply those. And I'm fairly new to the software. I know you've got some things in here already about those. Maybe they are already all the way there, and it'd be great to see a little bit about it.
Do that. I'll do those in reverse order. So under pilot info, first section is medical. You can either put in a standard medical up here, and you just, I don't deal with all the stuff about, oh, are you under 40? Do you need a first class? Whatever. Just put that in there. And I did have a question a couple of weeks ago about, after 6 months, your first class medical is still valid for second class. Is there a way to do that automatically? And the answer is no. And what I would suggest to do is to set up a deadline for that to remind you when your second class privileges die. But then you can also record basic med events here. And so you have to do 2 things for basic med. You have to pass a medical course, and you have to visit a physician. Oh, and you do have to have had a medical at some point. And then you upload a photo or a PDF of the completion and specify what kind of thing it was. And once you enter that, then I'll track basic med for you. And then you asked about
Wing safety.
Wings, yes. The main thing I have for wings. So again, I'm over here in the admin tool. So I have a wings activity completed, which is just a place to record the activity that you completed on a given flight. But I also have a phase completion, and that counts as a flight review. So I've got that marked over here. That's a true false on a flight. When you mark that, that will count as a flight review.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to actually put some names to faces. I've interacted with most of you, at least by email before. I got some great ideas for some features. and for some other talks. Maybe I'll put another one together for a week or two from now. Thanks.
We really appreciate all the time you put into it, Eric.
Stay safe.
Great job,
everyone.
Eric.
Thanks,
I
Eric.
hope we can all get back in the air very quickly.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Eric.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.